And we're very privileged here to have 4 amazing people going to be on stage who are actually working on different ways to talk about this from different perspectives. So we have Luis Morgner, who is actually co-founder at Jaime, which is an AI-driven startup. So he's actually trying to innovate while there's a place of regulation. We also have Dr. Alexandra Jüngling, who is from the University of Chicago and an attorney. So he comes from the regulatory space. Then when it comes to industry, there's Luisella Giani, who is the head of advisory in Ananade, and also at the same time a co-author of the European the Code of Conduct around implementing AI, and actually which has been appointed by the European Commission and AI office. So she comes from that perspective. How exactly are they trying to do that, her from industry and looking at it from a regulatory standpoint. And then last but certainly not least, the moderator of this conversation, who's going to be holding space and asking the questions and also providing her input, Dr. Alexandra Diening, who is the chairman and founder of the Human AI Symbiosis Alliance. So there you go, bringing it home. How can we actually have a human and AI symbiosis? So, without further ado, I would like to welcome the stage to the panelists and pass on the mic to Alexandra.
Hello? I don't want to give you that. So good. Good afternoon, everyone. I think the topic was introduced, so we don't have to kind of marinate in it once again. Long story short, we're going to be talking about how to balance regulation with innovation. We're going to start first introducing the panel people, but from a little bit different angle. We know who you are, where do you come from, but maybe if you also want to tell the audience a little bit more about your background in AI, specifically relevant to this topic. So not just who you are, where do you come from, but why they should listen to you in your opinion. Ladies first.
Yes, first of all, good afternoon. Apologies for my voice, but it's like our autumn, so we all start getting a bit of cold. So my name is Luisella Giani, and why you should listen to me, okay? I hope because I have something interesting to tell you, but most of all, I'm crazy and involved in AI starting from my university. So I wrote back in 2005 a thesis about semantic search engine. That was at that time an extremely exotic discipline. No one was taking you seriously, okay? Not engineers, not philosopher, no one, but for me was something I really wanted to do. Then I started a PhD, but in the meantime I was hired by eBay as a product manager. And then I was back heavily to AI about 10 years ago. At that time I was working for Oracle. I was, I will say, the kind of evangelist, but also I call myself translator, okay, in understanding what is happening in the world, so what companies want, what are their priorities, and translating for technical people to make product happen. And now, I'm still working on AI from all different levels, from strategy to implementation. And as, you can find written here, I'm also contributing. There is a European Commission launched what is called AI Office for finding a new regulation about general purpose AI. And I'm one of the persons contributing to it, representing in a way industry. And I hope, I can bring our voice, I will say, to the regulation.
Thanks so much. My name is Luis. I'm the co-founder of Jaime AI, and we are a small early-stage startup building an AI-based note-taking solution. So if you have a meeting, we summarize the meeting for you. So as you can infer from that, we work every day with all sorts of large language models. We chain them together to create a useful product for people. So we work on this application layer, if you're familiar with the terminology in the AI space. And I'm the naive guy who doesn't know that much about AI regulation, at least a bit of research, and I really try to ask the stupid questions and just share a bit of my practical experience on working with these systems for the last 4 years roughly when I got into deep learning. Maybe one more anecdote. Taught myself to code at the age of 12, So very deeply technical, passionate about building product out there. And yeah, excited for the conversation.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alexandra Jüngling. I'm a lawyer here at Accomplie, a specialized law firm for regulation, compliance, sustainability. And I'm kind of the arch enemy of innovation when you look at that board. Yeah. So because I care about law, I care about regulation. I've started working with the AI Act at a very early stage when it was a draft and published on it. I believe it was in 2020. Yeah? Now it's 24. It's in place. It's still very theoretical. We have very limited practical experience, but let's see how the discussion goes. Yeah, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. So we do have we do have people who actually wrote and contributed to those regulations. We have people who struggle implementing them. I think that's already enough to have a meaningful conversation. Maybe if I can add my 5 cents, I have very similar background to Luisella, a little bit less Italian, more French. Side. I entered the AI game almost 2 decades ago through the neuroscience. I'm a neuroscientist by training. Then I wrapped out or continued with the human behavior and consumer behavior, and my journey through AI was by default then always channeled and biased by the neuroscience start point, and I was focusing less on making AI smart, but more focusing on what the AI will be doing to us as a people, as individuals, as a society, and I'm a strong advocate of the human-centered AI. That's the reason we founded HISA, Human AI Symbiosis Alliance, when we are working with the regulators, Fortune 500 companies, surfacing all the current issues, providing frameworks and guiding them to when they are implementing the AI systems, they do it in a way which is not going to bite them in their butt later, sooner or later. So with that, we start with the very first topic, and we will be discussing the celebrity in a regulation world, and this is the AI Act, which is the first bold attempt to regulate the Wild West of AI. We want to dig down on what is the first. We know that there is a kind of tiered risk classification. That's a kind of first layer of the AI regulation. Second, there is the bold vision that it will be protecting the consumers and providing the safety. Meanwhile, it will be not impeding the innovation. Did we manage to do so? Do you want to start?
Well, time will tell, and I believe regulation will only play a part in the question whether AI in Europe will be successful. I think it's important to understand that regulation can only play a part in it, but what impact the AI Act will have needs to be seen. I'm quite optimistic. So looking at the laws that the European Commission has issued over the last couple of years, the AI Act seems to be quite reasonable. You may be surprised. Yeah, it's a 144-page document. So how can it be reasonable? It has been worse. So I believe that risk-based approach is good, and I believe that most of you will probably never really get in touch with the AI Act, yeah, and its impacts. You will maybe deal with it, you will discuss it, but most companies will need to be in the low risk class and not be subject to too many obligations. So discussing regulation as something that may block, yeah, or endanger innovation is one thing. I want to highlight also that the European Commission's position is that the AI Act actually facilitates innovation. I think it's important to understand that, at least from their perspective, and I think it's true. It's just there's some truth to it. Regulation facilitates standards. It creates trust. It creates a safe space for companies and users. And the expectation is that people will actually rather use AI technology when they trust it. I think that may indeed be a positive effect of regulation, and we should discuss it further, I believe, and not only the very cumbersome processes that may come with it.
There is actually a body of research which does highlight that the people tend to choose the AI systems which might be less accurate but more trusted rather than vice versa. So we said we do, the European Act should stimulate the innovation. Do you feel that's happening?
Yeah, so luckily Alexander educated me that the product that we built today does not fall in any risk category in that sense. So there's just limited impact for us as we operate as a small startup. However, as I was diving a bit deeper, there's one aspect which I see a little more critical, which is that we have this notion of general purpose AI with systemic risk, which translated basically means all the modern large language models that we use and transformer-based architectures are regulated much more strictly under this act. And the way that I've come to understand the act and its application today is that to deploy these models or even develop them in the European Union, you need to comply with those obligations set by the AI Act. And this, in consequence, means that there will be auditing involved, there will be compliance efforts involved, which ultimately just slow down the deployment of the state-of-the-art models that companies like us really need to build. So on the one hand, I think the AI Act really does a good job on the superficial level to say, hey, application layer we don't regulate, you can go ahead, you can innovate, you can serve your customers, you can build interesting products. But at the same time, if you look a level deeper, we really rely on using the cutting-edge state-of-the-art models to bring the best outcomes to customers. We have customers all over the world, not just in Europe. And now if we're impacted by this, because we can use state-of-the-art models, only 6 months after the US competitors are using it, we're in quite a hard spot because the quality of the product will definitely decrease in comparison to those players who are more aggressive in adopting those models in the future. So I think there's one aspect which should not be forgotten as a kind of second-order consequence of this enhanced scrutiny in the regulation of foundational models, which play an essential role in building and innovating on the product application level. So that's my take. So I see in general also optimistic views on that. So I think the risk-based classification makes a lot of sense, and it also draws good lines in some areas. However, there are bits in there which I think have quite significant consequences for our ability to compete on a global level for companies who are based in Europe. So yeah, this would be my take on that.
So it almost sounds like we need to decide between, or we need to kind of opt out for protecting us and toss the innovation a little bit under the bus. Luisella, is that the case?
Yes, I think also, I would like also to, highlight another aspect. I agree, actually, I mean, we shouldn't be in such an agreement, but we are, with all the points that are shared. But there is maybe something to highlight, because I do see every day, also during my work, because I lead a team of advisory, so we help also companies to understand how to adopt and implement AI. And what we see is that many people also, at executive level, they, for instance, everyone has used ChatGPT at least once, but they don't understand the privacy level and what does it mean, maybe sharing confidential data of their company into a system that is a public system and may use the data for the training of itself. And they don't do something with any malicious intent, clearly, but they are simply naive, okay? They don't know what they don't know. And so some of the points I think we are discussing today are really high level and theoretical. And I think we should focus also on how people are acting in their everyday life, because this technology, AI, and especially foundational model, large language model, is also a way to democratize AI because they are so useful, so easy to access, that everyone will use more and more. But what about educating them and explaining them that, there is, the law of copyright are applied also even more to large language model, and they can't simply use random text they find online to create their own document, or also that their own data, they need to be sure that they don't share randomly. And I think this level of education literacy is also something we miss, and we should be focused on a lot more in the future.
So what you're saying that in the literacy, it's not being incorporated in the current AI Act? At least not in a level which will cover.
Yes, I think it's less incorporated because the focus I see now is much more on the provider or on the implementator. So I would say the expert of the topic, that they do work on technology, and is much less on the consumers that are using technology. Because I think if we want to have an ecosystem that is really bringing us to the next level and really using the good AI, okay, taking the benefit we can get, is not only this knowledge shouldn't be only on the provider, on the technologist, but should be something where the public opinion has something to say, but with the right level of knowledge. And right now in AI is a far west, so everyone has a strong opinion about something often they don't understand. So that's the point.
And I think that's what we discussed, that in the end we need to regulate something which majority of people still barely understand. And even those who do understand just need to catch up with all the new developments. So in the end, it feels like we try to regulate completely, constantly fast-moving train, which is kind of difficult thing to do. And I think we've been having discussion on that. I was sharing anecdote. I was recently on a tech summit in Dublin, and there was a panel when we have wonderful panelists. One was the chief AI officer of NASA, second was a chief AI and ethics for major tech company, and there was a question what they think about the AGI, and the chief AI officer of this major tech company asked, what is the AGI? And that raised a question, how do you regulate and how do you safeguard your company in an area you do not understand? And then on the other hand, we say, well, at least the person was very candid and honest. You know, it's a lawyer, it's not a technology expert, so she does have a right to have a gaps. But then how do we regulate something we don't understand? Because let's say I dare to have a decent understanding of certain areas. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how to build a guardrail. So how do you move ahead?
I think it's clearly the difficulty you point to, and just coming to the legislative process of the EU AI Act, it started, I believe, 2020 around, the first drafts that were circulated. I believe that was the time, I'm not exactly sure. And just as an anecdote, the LLMs, they were just not known at that time. Yeah? I mean, nobody cared about them, and it was only the very last minutes of the legislative process that they were incorporated, the foundational models. In the early drafts, you wouldn't find anything from them. So indeed, it will be very difficult to regulate them. And what the legislative technique is just to postpone the regulation. Yeah, you have a law that's, again, it's 144 pages, but is it very specific? No. Yeah, you're waiting then for additional guidance that will be issued over the next years, and they need to change constantly. Whether that will be successful, I don't know. So when you balance, I mean, your job will be to innovate. Yeah? I think really be quicker than regulation. I think that's much more important, and just understand the overall framework and try to comply with it, in a sense. I think then you're in a safe space. Yeah, but I think the main tasks of European companies will be to innovate. And saying European companies, just to react to you, Luis, and for the sake of an argument, I would say the AI Act as the first comprehensive legislation on artificial intelligence will have a global effect. And it's clearly intended by the European Commission to be the first issuer of such a legislation. Firstly, to prevent that all the member states of the European Union have diverging legislation, which would be a bigger nightmare than what we have now, for sure, but also to counteract the technological leadership of the US and China. I think we need to be very clear, Europe is not in any ways a leader in technology. So the idea is, like with the GDPR, the data protection part, to counteract with regulation. And somehow safeguard Europe's position by legislation and regulation. Whether that works out in the long end, I have my doubts, But I do believe that the issues you have with the foundational models, US companies will have it as well. And I even argue that you and your company will not be the first target of then the authorities, It will be the big US companies, They will be the political target of the regulation. So I believe in the end you're in a better place than the US companies you may compete with.
Perhaps I can just react to that argument, which I think is an interesting point you raise. I look at this a bit more from a global competitiveness perspective and what this act really causes for us. And you're correct that let's say, AI note-taking competitors we have at Jaime currently in the US, they have to comply with the same rules as we do when they apply the European market. At the same time, Europe is not our only market. We are having customers all over the world, right? And we are in a competitive global disadvantage if we cannot adopt those new models as quickly as US companies in markets like the US or even like other markets which are lenient in the regulation. So I understand that point from a European standpoint, but it really hurts significantly our competitiveness for markets beyond Europe, which matter a lot for technology companies who build products and services which are not really constrained by geographical focus. AI note-taking is nothing that only is relevant for Germany or Europe, but beyond that.
But all the vendors that provide their product to EU customers also need to comply. So
Exactly, and that's the point I agree with. At the same time, it hurts us on the global market beyond Europe, which is an important market for us. Just to share, like a stat, around 40% of our revenue is coming from outside of Europe. And now having an effective disadvantage on that magnitude, yes, we're still early, we're still a small company, but I'm just using it as an example to infer from other technological companies who build products, right? They have the same struggles, and it's very hard for us to gain any market share in those markets beyond the EU. So I agree and see that point. The same applies for the EU market, so this is good, we can compete here. However, it hurts us significantly if we compete beyond the EU market.
So it seems like we need to keep deciding between tossing either the safety or the innovation under the bus and finding the fine trade-off between those. One thing I do hear from this conversation is that we are focusing heavily on regulating the companies which are building financial models, which, to be honest, in Europe is not many of them. Majority of European startups are actually the one who are building the products on the top of large language models, which we know Mira Murati, she was very vocal how hard, and I experienced it myself, how hard is it to do it right. When we look at the regulation, like, do we have this aspect covered? And specifically things like having the right literacy, having the right experts in a field. Does the regulation cover those points? And does it enable or rather foster or kind of impede?
Well, I think this is, do we have the right expert? I'm not sure, for sure there is a big effort into appointing people that they have certain knowledge. Probably what I notice is there is a prevalence of people from academia. There is nothing wrong with that, because I also sometimes think I'm a bit jealous of people from academia because they have a lot of time to research and think and study in deep, but clearly we may have a gap between the academia and the real world, and especially startup. And I think, Alexandra, you are to the point when saying, okay, in Europe, in reality, maybe, yes, we have Mistral, but for the rest, we are all using models that are built in US, and they follow certain logic, with also some of the paradox that maybe they launch something new, and in Europe can't be rolled out because it doesn't comply with the regulation. I have a provocation for Luis, okay, and is more because I think is also an alternative point of view compared to what you say. That is for sure true, that you may be penalized, if you do have to respect the rules and the other don't. Anyhow, think that whenever we are talking about responsible AI principles that are the basis of the European AI Act, is not only a European problem, is a human point of view, okay? And actually, also Alexander was saying, is the first really comprehensive trial of regulating AI, and we do understand this is important. Why not considering that we could be, and you could bring also with your company, to all the rest of the world, the principle of responsible AI, and in a way be an ambassador of that, also because this is going to happen also in many other continents. For sure in US, there are a lot of debates about that. And in Asia, in UK also. So there is nothing wrong, okay, with being first in doing something that will become important for the future, balancing that actually in the details, and in reality also, Alexander, now we don't want to go, into all the level of risk, but in reality, if you look at the majority of the system related to AI we are developing today are all low risk, and anyhow, even for the one high risk that are related to HR, student, or maybe for a bank deciding if they want to give a credit loan to someone. To simplify, whenever you can have an algorithm that can have some bias that get amplified, so it means you can have someone that can get discriminated by an algorithm in a kind of unconscious way, also in that case you simply need to provide a documentation, okay, that is called conformity assessment, but still you need to guarantee the transparency, explain how the algorithm works, but it's not bound, okay? So for me, I'm really curious to listen about you, Luis, and understanding what if we look at the other side, being ambassador of responsible AI.
Yeah, so do you want safe and secure, reliable AI that is ethical? Of course, it's the goal that we all have. And I do see the perspective of saying, hey, here in the EU, we have the chance to lead this movement on a global scale and set an example for other nations to adopt and really work on this global project in a sense by setting an example and saying, hey, we're the first ones to go that way. At the same time, what I really also think about a lot, make another point. You said we could be the leaders and responsible AI to the world. Not quite, because we're talking about foundational models. We are not the ones building the foundational models, we're applying them, right? So this ethical AI foundational model is still to the model builders in the world, in the US and so forth. And yes, we work with those models and it's great for us if they're more ethical, more safe, more transparent. Surely, that is completely right. At the same time, I'm just saying in the market, it's quite radical. I mean, I found the fact quite interesting that people are happy to use an AI, which is less accurate, but more trustworthy. And that's the same experience I have. I stopped using ChatGPT for a long time because my data was put into the data set to kind of fine tune the models for them continuously more and more. And I don't want any proprietary code that we have in those system and training sets. So I moved to a less capable model and used it so I can confirm that data point. At the same time,
can I just jump in? Which this less capable model, you can still fine tune it, you can still rack augment it, you can still kind of make it much more performant, and you have something which is working still fine and you can trust.
Yes, and at the same time, I was the consumer in that example, right? So I was using this model to code faster. For instance, get inspired how I code, right? And there I don't fine-tune it myself, but at the same time I agree that you can take less capable models, invest some resources and fine-tune them to get to on-par performance. But coming back to this responsible AI leading point, so again, I think it's the model providers who are ultimately the ones leading that. It's not us, as we're just applying it. But at the same time, I think the end utility to consumers is also one of the driving forces there, because if there's two similar products and one is like orders of magnitude better or like in significant dimensions better, there is like this, I think, curve where the flip happens. And in the example that we made, ultimately the best product really wins. And another example I can just share, Apple Intelligence is a very useful product that now is available in the US. It is not available in Europe, and I think there's no concrete timelines for it to become available in Europe. I do think this is quite a significant suffering that we as EU consumers have if we look at this example. And this is just one of many that we could look at also on the business side. So if we don't look on the consumer, but more on the B2B application side. So we're always lacking behind 6 to 12 months because of regulation that we set first. And we say, yeah, we're the first ones to push responsible AI. Isn't that great? Yeah, it's cool. But the reality is that our capability to innovate as companies, but also consumers, is much smaller because we cannot realize those benefits from those advanced systems as quickly as the US or other markets, which are more lenient. And we can extrapolate this also to businesses, really. I just want to take maybe one more example. If there's an AI model you can use to optimize the decision making in a given process in an operation, and this AI model is proven to work really well, let's not use hiring because this is like high risk, but let's just make up an example. If the US companies can adopt this today and improve their operational efficiency, there's seriously value generation for those companies because they apply it first and they can realize those gains quickly. If in Europe we need to wait for a year for any corporation to then adopt it and deploy it and so forth, there's 1 year of catching up we need to do. And I think there is an increased competitive difference in the dynamic between Europe and US. So I totally see the attractiveness of thinking, we are you, we can set an example, we're leading this change, let's do this. But at the same time, the reality I find is that we're also hurting ourselves seriously in those ways, because if you look at the game theoretical perspective, like yes, in the US there's debates, there's I think the executive order being passed, but this is really focused on voluntary actions. So they say you can independently audit your systems and get a certificate and whatsoever. But from this perspective, I think this argument weighs for me more heavily than saying, hey, we're the ones, because in the end, it's about pace. It's really about speed and innovation, and even like a 6 to 12 month delay in deploying those models and realizing some utility gains in different dimensions is quite significant from my experience, because the state-of-the-art model, which is state-of-the-art today, might be outdated in 6 months, right, or even 2.
So from this point, we do hear it can hinder innovation quite dramatically. I will maybe add 1 or 2 points. I think, meanwhile, it puts some companies in disadvantage. I'm clear here that might be the case. At the same time, it also channels innovation in certain directions. So Europe now become a melting pot on startups focusing on privacy issues and acting around the AI Act. So when it comes to startup focusing on federated learning, on edge AI, we are becoming the epicenter, and not because we were born to be, but because this is an environment which is basically, there is a need in the market. So I think we hear it can actually hurt and hinder, and must be super frustrating. On the other hand, it does streamline innovation into areas which probably would just become unattended. So now let's just jump on the other side of so we talk about the financial models, we talk about what it does to a company who is then dealing with those financial models. When it comes to company itself, and you, Luisella, you already tackled that, when it comes to company being responsible, the way they build and become advocates for responsible AI, fostering fairness, fostering transparency, how to go around that? You who work with Fortune 500 companies, helping them to do so.
I think, what I see now, there is, I think, two different speeds. There are biggest companies, the Fortune 500, that are really well aware of responsible AI and they want to become ambassador. And sometime, back, to what you were saying, I have, and I will say another anecdote, that sometimes is also not about blocking innovation, but sometimes we do have, lawyers like Alexander, that may be in between and may not understand properly what a technology does, and then they may block something that theoretically we could go on, So there are even other actors. There is not only the legislation, is also how these get interpreted, in real life, in simple activities by, the people that those Fortune 500 companies trust and may not have the technology background to maybe get some nuances that maybe for other people are clear. But for sure there is a strong, I would say, strong willingness to become ambassador of responsible AI. There is always, in this case, a bit of PR, that doesn't mean that is related, like a bit for sustainability, Everyone would like to be responsible AI, would like to be sustainable, would like to be seen as the good guy. It doesn't mean that this is then executed, in a clear way outside of the PR part. And I'd suffer a bit more, and I don't know, because when looking at smaller companies instead, I think also the European AI Act topic, to be honest, I thought that this will be a big splash, that everyone wanted to know more about European AI Act, but this didn't happen, So it's more that we need to push a bit for it.
Can I just ask one question, and then who of you read the AI Act? Not many.
Many people.
Many compared to...
Well, many compared to
what I would expect.
Well, I read a summary from ChatGPT. No, I'm joking, but...
I actually, just the anecdote.
I would like to come to that, So really about some practical aspects. And I think it's important to understand that the AI Act is not the first of its kind in terms of a regulatory framework issued by the European Commission. And I've just seen over the last years quite many of those in the area of sustainability reporting, supply chain compliance, deforestation. I mean, you name it. It's a huge list of things being issued. And what happens then? So member states need to transpose those in national laws, not all of those. We know the distinction between directives and regulations. But mostly there's some work to be done that takes time. There's a big, noise in the industry. People are upset. But after a few years, things calm down. And why do they calm down? Because you realize that your obligations are actually manageable, or at least you can cut them in a way, implement them in a way that they are manageable. So you automate the regulation. And then indeed you come to the point that AI is drafting the rules, AI suggests you how to implement them into your company, and then AI is reviewing the implementation of the AI-written rules that have been implemented by AI systems. So it comes to a circuit and nobody cares somehow. Yeah, it's just within the machine, everything that happens. And then also important to see enforcement of those regulations. What happens? Yeah, and very often not much. Yeah, to be very clear, industry, companies do not know what the rules say, what they need to do to implement them. Same is true for the authorities. I mean, these authorities need to be built first, yeah? So you hire people from the market, you educate them in an organization, then they internally discuss for the first 2 or 3 years, then for the next 3 years they discuss with other stakeholders, the industry, and maybe a few years down the road, yeah, they will pick up some cases and maybe 10 years later issue a fine that may be dealt with before the European courts. So we should not overestimate, I think, the impact of the regulation from that fear angle. Yeah, oh my God, I need to comply, otherwise they kill me. I think that may not be the biggest part you can get out of the regulation. And maybe you can really indeed review, not the AI Act, it's way too complicated, yeah, but some secondary literature, some process flows that have been developed by guys like us, yeah, so that you can more easily implement what you need to do. Maybe you get even something good out of it, yeah, and you have already your development stages, you have your gates, and you add some of that regulatory stuff to it, and you will realize it's not so cumbersome in the end, yeah, if you really boil it down to the actual implementation. And then again, what is the risk of being blocked from the market, being fined? I think for most of the companies you will work with, it's very limited. There will be big companies. You mentioned Apple, yeah, maybe, I don't know why they haven't issued that, maybe part of the regulation, Chinese companies. But let's not forget, in that context also, the AI Act is not yet in force. Yeah? I mean, we're all complaining about things that have not been even been put in place, so we don't know what the actual effect will be, and maybe the fear of companies now is bigger than the actual impact.
And I always keep saying when people complain about the AI regulations, recently, I think you guys know about LinkedIn, which was harvesting your data and training its models, opting people out without their consent. When people complain about AI Act, I always say, do you mean this AI Act which protected me as being in Europe from my data being used against my consent? So I think there are two sides of the coin, and you better be on the sides which is mine, you know, where I more benefit rather than being stifled. But I think it will be trade-off between tossing ourselves under the bus or tossing the innovation under the bus. I think there will be companies which will be paying the price, and then there will be companies, there will be new emerging technologies and new emerging interests like a federated learning and edge AI, which will be blossoming. So I think it's just the name of the game, and some of them will pay higher price on kind of protection of the rest. But one thing which I hear independently, whether it's game which is positive or negative and it's net, I feel there is a little bit of disconnect between the regulators, the regulation itself, and the companies which are benefiting from it or are being impaired by it or needs to apply it. What is the way ahead to mitigate this disconnection, to make it more tangible, less theoretical?
Yeah, for sure, you know, I believe that the fact that the European Commission now is open, okay, to get people from the industry, from, you know, companies and so on, for instance, to contribute to the general purpose AI, you know, to go back to Luis, is the foundational model. I think this is already, sorry, a first step, okay, and this is, we will see what is going to happen, but this is a first step. The second point and then is also, as Alexander is saying, it will depend a lot by how each country, each state will go to enforce it, okay? And we don't know yet, because also finally it will be more if we find out that you are not compliant with certain regulation, you can get a penalty, but then this will be different about who is going the controller, who is going to do the penalty, and I think different states, they need to explain how they are going to do in their country. So unluckily, I think, because in this case I'm a bit more in favor of standard, but we may see a lot of fragmentation on how this will be enforced. Why this could be something to close the gap? Because again, we will need, unluckily for all of us, look at the details. So it means what is exactly the use case I'm just going to implement, and do an analysis on, first of all, risk level, okay? But then secondly, which kind of data we are using? Is the data set we can consider neutral? Do we know exactly how the algorithm works for what is the traditional machine learning? For foundational model, I agree with Luis, we need to also, and it will going to happen, okay, that the big tech companies will have some step into that. Some already declared that they are going to get, if you get a penalty, they're going to pay for it, okay? If you're a company using a foundational model and you verticalize, and, they will be sure they are together with you. But I do expect in the next 1 year, 1.5 years, a lot of declaration and movement, also because, being a bit cynical, the money that was invested, okay, in making the foundational model happen is too much to make it fail. So, they will find a way to also comply with the regulation, but without blocking what is the evolution, because Europe is a big market, okay? So even if we probably are not the same as US or Asia, but for sure this is needed and will happen, I think, really in the details, filling this gap.
And maybe just to kind of build on Louis' pain point, he was mentioning there was a survey by a UK research company which actually in 2022 interviewed all the SMEs, so small, medium companies, and 62% of them do believe that the AI Act is hampering the innovation and their competitiveness in global markets. So you're not alone in your struggle, unfortunately. Now, how do we move along? So the regulation is there. It's not perfect. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. And it needs to constantly evolve. So how the average Joe, who is running its startup or running a big tech company, building on his financial models, or average Louis, how does he move along? What's the future of regulation? How does he make sure that because it's going to keep moving, that maybe he can be working today, but not just today, but also 2 years from now? What's the way ahead? Is there any anticipatory way to foresee where the regulation might bring us?
Well, at some point, he may need to seek advice, yes, from legal experts in that respect, or from other consultants. And what they will tell Luis is, at this point, make an assessment, make an inventory of your technology, and classify your risk. Yeah. And then you probably end the story at this point for most of the companies, because they are low risk, and then there's really very limited obligations following from that. If you're in a higher risk area, then you surely need to do more. But it's not necessarily a huge burden, because you can boil down all the obligations of the Act to some workflows where you assess what are the elements you need to comply with, how do you do that. There will be standardized solutions, yeah. They're already developed now, yeah, that's what I say. So AI is also active in that respect. So you're getting tools that will very much facilitate what you need to do. And if you comply with those and show at least good intention to comply with the law, I believe your enforcement risk will be very low, yeah, and you can really focus on your business and where your energy and time should be.
Now, if you delve into the future horizons, quantum computing, RegTech, let's enlighten the audience about where the future might bring us.
I would love to make so many points, but we just also shared, but perhaps for the sake of time. No, okay. So just one thing I want to clarify is I'm not too obsessed about the regulatory risk we personally as Jaime AI face, but rather the consequence of the regulation in regards to foundational model, which are the most essential part to the products we build, right? And the negative consequence for the speed. If we talk about, okay, how can we make this gap smaller? I think in general, the intuition to say, hey, we should work with private companies, with people actually working on these systems is a great intent. The reality is, if you look at the top 10 performing models at the world right now, like none of them are from Europe. Mistral, I think, just lost the 10th place or something on the Open LLM leaderboard on Hugging Face, which is an open source leaderboard for the performance of models, right? So I'm just questioning or thinking out loud, like, who should go there? In Europe, we don't really have any strong foundational European model competition. Mistral is the only hope that we have, and I think they're doing a good job for what they can do. But now the question is, does the AI Act make it easier or harder for them to compete? And I think the answer is clearly it makes it harder for them, right? So I think we're hurting it in this way. And this is kind of the perspective where I feel the pain from a technology-loving person that really wants Europe to be strong and in a strong position to go forward, right? And that's kind of the effect that I'm most worried about, just to maybe add that point.
No, but on this, I think, to have the European foundational model, I don't think maybe European AI Act is one barrier, but I don't think is the key barrier, because the key barrier is capital, okay, and data center and capital.
No, it's the point I'm going to make. Indeed, yeah, regulation may be cumbersome, burdensome. Indeed, yeah, I don't want to question that. Yeah, that's surely the case, but I don't believe that's the biggest problem for developing technology in Europe. It's capital, access to capital, it's financing, it's immigration laws. There's a lot around that, and when you criticize the act, then it's maybe you should have focused on other topics. You should have worked in very different areas. Yeah.
So what I agree with is it's surely not the main reason why we don't have competitive foundational models, but surely it's not helping to make it possible. But then if we say we lost the fight of foundational models in the EU, we don't have any way to catch up.
More a signal even that politics says, yeah, we've lost that that competition anyway. Yeah, so we're competing now on other level, the regulation.
It almost feels like we lost the game. Let's just protect ourselves between what's about to come from a different territory.
It's not even protect, yeah. Let's dominate other platforms from Europe. I think it's even more aggressive. I've seen that. I've seen that in the discussion on the early drafts of the AI Act, saying, with GDPR we were successfully dominating the space and somehow created an economic advantage for Europeans. Let's do the same in AI.
But how do I want to dominate if I lag behind 6 to 12 months in everything that I build? I think I really understand what it means for the European market, and I'm totally with you on that end. But at the same time, I think we shouldn't fool ourselves that the realities of a global economy, of a global market we try to address, seriously hurts the stuff that we can build if we lag around. It's a dead weight we're pulling, right? And the intent is not foundational models, but it still has implications for companies like us who want to serve and get big in a global market, bring tax revenue to Europe and so forth. And we really think about, hey, if this is being enforced, and now we can say, like, hey, it's not enforced, it's fine. But like, why do we pass the act then in the first place? I seriously need to question, right? But we seriously think about moving to the US also with our legal structure entity right now, because if this really is about to come as a consequence, and yes, it's theoretical, but it's still very likely from how I understand it, I think it's serious problems because we're not the only ones thinking like that.
It's not only the AI Act, yeah, it's also really getting access to experts, getting access to money, which are probably more important factors.
The whole ecosystem, yeah. I think we can continue for hours. It's a very passionate topic also for me. We have last 4 minutes, so let's just get aspirational. We wash all the dirty laundries of the AI Act. And that AI Act brings into us, into our businesses, into our private lives. Let's end up in aspirational note. Let's see what is the future. So we talk about quantum computing, we talk about red tech, we talk about edge computing and federated already. Where do you see that maybe this little squeeze we are in because of the regulation might channel us towards?
Yeah, I think, and it's really interesting also this debate, but, the point, look at the future, because, okay, today we are in this mainly American-dominated foundational model, but what about open source model? What about federated learning, edge computing? Quantum, I'm a bit less expert, and I think will take a bit longer than we expect to get quantum computing, but maybe let's play on those areas where we can play, okay? Because some I agree with Alexandra. I think, maybe we can read the European regulation like a way to protect, because we already gave up. We say, okay, we were a bit too late in the game. We didn't invest 5 years ago. Okay, now we can't. But, there is the word and the rest that could be really shiny. And I would like to highlight that, this is really true for many European countries. We do have some excellence into, the fashion, manufacturing, design, and we don't have yet AI that is serving this kind of niche companies. And it's something that we can build from scratch, because it's really, those are global companies that are serving the rest of the world with something unique. And maybe we should think about what unique AI we can bring to them that we need to understand how to build now, maybe learning from the mistake that were done by foundational model, because there is, the high risk. I don't think we will get back to AI winter, is unlikely, but clearly a lot of hype, okay, and we will need to see then the real adoption that some of those models they have, besides us technicians, but in the real world.
I'm actually very excited about this down of the hype. I think we tragically need a little bit of AI sobering right now, and getting a little bit less from the, paragliding somewhere in a dreamland back to the earth. So I'm actually incredibly excited about the hype sobering. Alexandra, what's your take?
For the future, I'm not really good in predicting. I'm not confident of my ability to predict. But I don't believe. I said at the very beginning, I don't see the AI Act as a bad law. Yeah, it's quite well made. It has flaws, surely, but it's not too bad, and it can be applied by most companies. I think everybody has understood it by now. At the same time, I don't believe it will play an important part. Yeah, I don't think it will shape industry, will shape technology. I think technology is stronger. Laws need to be accepted by societies, and I don't see that really at that point. You also see in many other areas that regulation has somehow reached a peak, where people stop understanding why there's new regulations. I've heard complaints about regulation for decades now, but I think in the last years it has just peaked. And I see even the political parties in Germany and abroad that traditionally favor regulation. They want to have a strong state, everything needs to be governed, money needs to be channeled through the state before it's good money, and then subsidies being sent to the industry, that people more and more understand that this cannot be the future, and that the technology and economy of the US, China, and maybe other places will just not allow Europeans to rely on regulation to remain successful. So it's a political statement, I'm aware of that, but somehow that's what I believe will shape the industry and not the regulation.
Technology is stronger. That's very powerful, beautiful, but very scary sentence.
Sure, technology will be stronger than regulation.
And very pragmatic, actually. Jamie, Louis, I'm not sure if I got it. So 50 hard minutes. What's your take?
Quickly, I strongly agree with that statement. I think technological change is inevitable, and we can fight it and try to remain stuck to the status quo, but ultimately it's stronger in the economic incentives that we live in today. So I think that's a nice perspective to also have and kind of address the significance of the AI Act in the whole bigger picture. On the trend side, there's one thing I'm most excited about right now, which obviously are the reasoning-based models from OpenAI. There's a new scaling law where we have the O1 models, which just were released, where we, for the first time, go away from a pattern matching-based system one type of thinking model, which just gives you pattern-matched answers very quickly, to a system which is able to think about a problem for more time. So it's kind of inference time compute, which is extremely interesting. And this, I think, for the first time now, feasibly allows us to think about agentic type of solutions in the market, which means I can have an AI developer, a software engineer, which I give a problem to, I describe it in natural language, and it goes for a couple hours, it comes back with a solution, and now all of a sudden it's not software as a service, it's service as software, right? And this is this big change that also all, I think, the Silicon Valley-based companies are currently working on and jumping upon, and they believe that this is by far a larger opportunity from the market than any cloud service or software as a service by orders of magnitude. So that's a field that I think is extremely exciting. It's very clear that this is happening in the next 5 years and will slowly find its way into our everyday uses. And I think it will also make our world richer in many ways because we accelerate our progress through that.
It's a wonderful ending. So thank you very much for a great, meaningful conversation. Great insights. Anna, over to you.